I need you to imagine this with me for just a second. You open your eyes and the first thing you notice is that everything feels wrong. The light above you is too bright, the smell in the air is sharp like antiseptic, and your mouth is so dry it feels like sandpaper. At first, you think maybe you're in your bedroom, maybe the morning sun is coming through the blinds a little too harshly, but then it hits you, the steady beeping, the quiet shuffle of nurses in the hallway, and the cold rail at your side. You're not at home. You're in a hospital bed. Now here's where it gets even darker, and you need to stick with me on this because I promise this isn't just another random hospital story you scroll past. This is the kind of story you clicked for, the kind of mystery that grips your chest and doesn't let go. Because when I turned my head to look for the one person I trusted most, my wife, she wasn't there. Instead, I found a note that made my blood run cold. And when the doctor finally told me why I was there, I realized something so shocking it didn't even feel real. My wife was gone and so was one of my kidneys. Now, before I take you all the way into the twists and the raw, painful truth of what happened, let me pause and talk directly to you. Because I know how it feels to click on a video like this. You're looking for an answer, you're looking for that one reveal that explains everything, and I want you to know you're going to get it. I'm not here to waste your time. I'm not here to feed you half-truths or drag you along for nothing. You're going to get the answer to the question that pulled you into this video, but in order for it to hit with the full weight, the way it hit me, you have to hear how it unfolded. Because nothing in my life, nothing in my marriage, and nothing in my reality made sense once I woke up in that bed. So lean in with me because the moment you think you've figured it out, I guarantee you'll realize there's another layer hiding beneath it. This is one of those stories that crawls under your skin and forces you to wonder, do you really know the person you love? Or could they be capable of something darker than you ever imagined? The hospital room was silent except for the monitor, each beep echoing like a countdown. My hand instinctively reached for my side, and that's when I felt the bandages tight and foreign. My body was sore in a way that told me something had been taken from me, and my heart raced as confusion set in. I tried to call out for my wife, but my voice cracked and broke, weak and unfamiliar. She should have been there, holding my hand, whispering that everything was going to be okay. But the chair beside my bed was empty. No jacket draped over the back. No purse on the floor. Nothing. It was like she had never been there at all. And then, just as panic started to take hold, I noticed the small folded piece of paper on the tray table. My name was written on the outside in her handwriting, the same handwriting that used to leave me love notes in my lunch bag, the same handwriting that used to decorate birthday cards with little hearts. Only now it felt like a stranger's script. I need you to stop for a second and think about what you would do. Imagine you're lying in that bed, your body cut open, your mind hazy, and the one person you trust most has left behind nothing but a folded note. Do you open it? Do you wait for answers from the doctors? Do you scream for help? That's the kind of choice I was staring at, and I want you to sit in that with me because this is the moment my reality broke apart. You and I both know that hospitals are supposed to be places of healing, places where you go to get better. But what if you woke up and realized the very person who was supposed to protect you had delivered you into that bed for reasons you couldn't understand? That's when the real fear kicks in, the kind of fear that makes you question whether love is real, or whether it's just a mask someone wears until they take what they want from you. The doctor finally came in, and his face was grave in a way that told me whatever he was about to say, it wasn't good. He checked the machines, looked at my charts, and then said it flatly, like it was just another Tuesday morning diagnosis. Your left kidney was removed. Just like that. No soft buildup, no cushion. My heart dropped, and my first thought was that it had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe I'd been in an accident. Maybe it was some medical emergency I couldn't remember. But then he followed it up with the words that turned my blood to ice. You signed off on it. My signature was on the consent forms. My approval. But here's the problem, I never signed anything. At least, not that I remember. And when I looked at the signature, shaky and wrong, it was clear someone had forged it. This is where the paranoia started to creep in, and I want you to come into my head with me. Because the thought that someone close to you could take advantage of you like that, it doesn't just break your trust, it shatters your sense of reality. I started replaying every moment with my wife, every fight, every quiet dinner, every time she looked me in the eye and told me she loved me. Was any of it real? Or was she setting me up this whole time? That's the question I kept turning over and over in my head as I stared at that note, still unopened, sitting there like a ticking time bomb. I wanted to rip it apart, to know the truth immediately, but part of me was terrified of what I would find inside. Because once you read the words, once you know what someone really thinks, there's no going back. And here's the part where I need you to lean even closer because this is where things start to unravel in ways you won't see coming. My wife wasn't just gone. She wasn't just someone who vanished into thin air after doing the unthinkable. No, What I would eventually learn is that she was playing a game so much bigger than me, so much bigger than us, and it left me questioning not only my marriage but my own sanity. The note she left behind was only the beginning, and the truth buried inside it would change everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and betrayal. But I'm not going to give it to you just yet. Because right here at this moment is where the real story begins. This is the line in the sand between the life I thought I had and the nightmare I was about to live. And if you want to know what that note said, if you want to know why my wife disappeared with my kidney and what kind of twisted plan she had all along, you need to stay with me. Because the next thing I discovered made me realize I wasn't just a victim of betrayal. I was a pawn in something far darker than I could have ever imagined. When I finally gathered enough strength to push myself upright against the stiff hospital pillows, my head was swimming with questions that seemed to multiply faster than I could answer them. The note still sat there, mocking me with its silence, but I couldn't bring myself to open it just yet. Instead, my mind pulled me backward, replaying the last clear memories I had before waking up in that sterile room. I remembered dinner with my wife just 2 nights earlier, spaghetti, her favorite glass of red wine, the way she laughed when I spilled sauce on my shirt. Everything had felt normal, routine, even like any other married couple trying to make it through another weekday. She had kissed me goodnight, leaned into me like she always did, and whispered, "I love you." How could I have known that within 48 hours, I would be lying in a hospital bed missing an organ, with her nowhere in sight? That's the kind of thing that makes you question whether you ever truly know someone or if you only know the version of themselves they allow you to see. The doctors kept circling around me like I was just another patient, and though they asked questions, none of them were the ones I needed answered. They wanted to know if I was feeling any pain, if I remembered signing consent papers, if I had been involved in any kind of voluntary donation program. And I wanted to scream at them, no, no, and no. Because here's the thing, this wasn't just about surgery. This was about betrayal. This was about trust being carved out of me the same way that kidney had been. As I sat there, weak and confused, I started thinking about the days leading up to this moment. My wife had been acting different. Not enough for me to label it as suspicious, but enough that I had noticed something off. She was on her phone more often, whispering during calls, locking the screen when I walked into the room. She had always been private, sure, but this was different. I chalked it up to work stress or maybe just needing space, but now, lying there with stitches in my side, every little moment came back to me with a new weight. I know you're probably thinking what I was thinking too. Maybe she had financial problems she wasn't telling me about. Maybe someone pressured her into doing something desperate. Or maybe, just maybe, this was about something even deeper, something personal that I never saw coming. And I want you to sit with that thought, because in every relationship there are shadows, parts of a person's past or personality they don't let you see. Sometimes those shadows are harmless, little secrets we all carry, but sometimes those shadows can grow so dark they swallow everything you thought was real. The first red flag, if I'm honest with you, came a week before all this happened. We were invited to a dinner party at a friend's house. Nothing fancy, just neighbors and a few co-workers. Everything was going fine until I noticed how quiet she was that night. Normally she was the center of attention, laughing, telling stories, making everyone comfortable, but that evening she barely spoke. She excused herself to take a phone call outside, and when I followed a few minutes later, she was gone. I waited on the porch, staring out into the street until she came back, brushing it off with a quick excuse about a call from her sister. At the time, I let it slide, but now that memory came roaring back as a possible clue. Was it really her sister? Or was it someone else entirely, someone who had a hand in what would later happen to me? I tried to think back even further, to her recent behaviors and changes in routine. She started going to the gym at odd hours, sometimes coming home later than expected, sweaty and distracted. She said it helped with stress, that it was her time to clear her head. But when I asked if I could join her one evening, she resisted. She gave me a smile, kissed me and said, "Babe, this is just my thing." And because I trusted her, because I wanted to believe in us, I didn't push. But what if those trips weren't about exercise at all? What if they were meetings with someone, planning something behind my back? And then there was the money. I had noticed small amounts disappearing from our shared account, nothing large enough to cause alarm, but consistent enough that I started to wonder. When I asked her, she said she had been buying little things for the house, groceries, birthday gifts for her coworkers. It made sense at the time, but now, with the pieces rearranging themselves in my head, I couldn't ignore the possibility that she was siphoning money for something else, maybe even as part of whatever plan led me to that hospital bed. You see, that's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't scream at you from the start. It's quiet, subtle, like a shadow moving in the corner of your eye. You don't see it until it's too late, and by then the damage is already done. And I need you to think about your own life for a second. If you really dug into the little moments, the odd behaviors, the half-truths your loved ones tell you, could you be sure they aren't hiding something from you? That's what I was left to grapple with as I stared at that unopened note, terrified of the words written inside. And just when I thought my mind couldn't spiral any further, another possibility hit me. What if she wasn't the only one involved? What if someone else had gotten to her, manipulated her, used her love for me, or maybe her resentment against me, to push her into this? The thought made my chest tighten. My coworkers, my friends, even members of my family, suddenly they all became potential suspects in my head. I remembered a colleague at work who had once asked too many questions about my health during a lunch break, casually bringing up organ donations like it was nothing. At the time, I brushed it off as idle conversation, but now it felt like a breadcrumb I had missed. That's the danger of not paying attention. You overlook the little clues until they pile up into something you can't ignore. And here's where I want to be honest with you. I wasn't just questioning my wife anymore, I was questioning everything. Every phone call, every missing dollar, every excuse suddenly had a new meaning, and it made me feel like I had been blind for months, maybe years. But the worst part wasn't the confusion or even the betrayal, it was the sinking feeling that I was only at the beginning of this nightmare, and the real answers were still waiting for me, hidden in shadows I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. And that's why, even though the note sat right there within reach, I couldn't open it just yet. Because the truth has a way of cutting deeper than any scalpel. And once you read it, once you see it, you can never go back to the world you thought you knew. I wish I could tell you that after lying in that hospital bed, after convincing myself to finally reach for that folded note, the answers came quickly and clearly. But life doesn't work like that, does it? Sometimes the truth hides itself behind obstacles you don't expect, almost like it knows you're searching and decides to play a cruel game of hide and seek. My hand was trembling as I picked up the note, and I swear I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. But just as I was about to unfold it, a nurse rushed into the room with a clipboard, her voice firm and urgent, telling me I needed to sign some follow-up paperwork for my discharge instructions. The interruption broke the spell and I dropped the note back on the tray table. I wanted to tell her to come back later, that this was the worst possible time, but in my weakened state I didn't have the fight in me. By the time she finished and left, the note was gone. That perfectly folded piece of paper with my wife's handwriting, the only clue I had to why she vanished and why I was missing a kidney, had disappeared from the tray table like it had never existed at all. You can probably imagine what I felt in that moment. Anger, panic, confusion, it all came flooding in at once and I searched everywhere. I looked under the bed, I checked the floor, I pulled back the thin hospital blanket as if it might have slipped beneath me somehow. Nothing. And when I called the nurse back, she looked at me with the kind of expression people give when they think you're delirious, like maybe the medication was messing with my memory. She swore she hadn't seen any note on the tray, swore she hadn't touched anything, and she walked away shaking her head like I was just another patient making up stories in a haze. But I knew what I saw. The note was real and now it was gone. Which meant someone didn't want me to read it. That's when paranoia started crawling into the room like a shadow I couldn't escape. Who could have taken it? The nurse? A doctor? Some stranger who slipped in while I wasn't paying attention? Or was it possible my wife had someone watching me, making sure I never uncovered the truth she had left behind? I tried to calm myself down, but every second that passed without that note in my hands felt like losing a piece of my sanity. It was the only link I had, and without it, I was left with nothing but questions and scars. And then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife even deeper, a man I had never seen before appeared in the doorway of my room. He wasn't dressed like hospital staff, no scrubs or white coat, just a simple button-down shirt tucked into dark pants. He stepped inside with the kind of confidence that told me he didn't belong but didn't care who noticed. He looked me straight in the eye, leaned in close and whispered, "Stop asking questions. Some things you're better off not knowing." Then, without another word, he walked out, disappearing down the hall before I could even react. I pressed the call button, demanding the nurses tell me who he was, but they claimed no one had entered my room besides them. They said I must have dreamed it, another side effect of the drugs in my system. But you and I both know that wasn't a dream. That was a warning. At that moment, something shifted in me. Fear gave way to determination. Whoever was trying to bury the truth didn't realize they had just lit a fire inside me. If they thought I was going to lie back and accept this, they didn't know me at all. But still, I couldn't ignore the fact that I was weak, stitched up, and vulnerable. Every step I took would have to be careful, every decision calculated, because one wrong move could end with me losing more than just a kidney. As I was discharged and sent home, I expected to find some kind of clue waiting for me there, maybe something my wife left behind that could point me in the right direction. But home wasn't the safe place I hoped it would be. When I walked through the door, the house felt wrong, hollow, like it had been scrubbed clean of her presence. The closet where her clothes should have been was empty. Her jewelry box gone. Even the framed photos we had taken together over the years, vacations, holidays, anniversaries, were missing from the walls. It was as if she had erased herself from our life completely, leaving me standing in a stranger's home that used to be mine. And here's where the past began to creep back in, carrying memories I had buried long ago. You see, this wasn't the first time she had vanished from my life without explanation. Early in our relationship, before we were married, there had been a 2-week stretch where she stopped answering her phone, stopped coming by, no calls, no texts, nothing. When she finally reappeared, she brushed it off as needing space, claiming she had been overwhelmed. I believed her back then because love makes you excuse things you shouldn't, but now I couldn't help but wonder if that disappearance all those years ago was tied to the same darkness I was living through now. Had she been hiding a secret life all along? Had I been blind to the warning signs because I wanted so badly to believe in her? The more I thought about it, the more my suspicion grew that maybe she hadn't acted alone this time. Someone was helping her, someone who knew how to cover tracks and erase evidence. Maybe it was that so-called friend she reconnected with from high school, the one she used to text late at night when she thought I was asleep. Or maybe it was her brother, who had always seemed to resent me, who once told me in anger that I didn't deserve her. It could even have been someone I never suspected, someone closer to me than I realized. That's the problem with betrayal. It plants seeds of doubt in every direction, and suddenly everyone around you looks like they could be holding a knife behind their back. But then came the moment that twisted the knife in me even deeper. I was searching through the drawer in our bedroom, looking for anything she might have left behind, when I found an envelope tucked beneath the lining. Inside was a photo of her with another man, a man I had never seen before, their arms wrapped around each other in a way that wasn't just friendly. And written across the back of the photo in her handwriting were the words, "For when the time comes." I don't think I've ever felt my stomach drop the way it did in that moment. Because this wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was proof that whatever she had done to me, she had been planning it for longer than I could have ever imagined. But before I could process what it meant, before I could even take a breath, I heard the sound of footsteps outside the house. Heavy, deliberate, like someone was standing there, waiting. I froze, clutching the photo in my hand, and realized I wasn't alone. I stood frozen in the silence of that house, the photo burning in my hand, the words scrawled across the back echoing in my head like a threat that refused to fade. For when the time comes. Those words could mean anything, and in my weakened state, my mind spun through every possible scenario, none of them good. The footsteps outside pressed down on my chest like a weight, each one deliberate, too slow to be casual, too heavy to belong to a passing neighbor. My first instinct was to hide, to sink deeper into the shadows of my own home, but then I realized something even worse. If someone was standing there waiting, it meant they weren't afraid of being seen. They wanted me to know they were there. They wanted me to feel their presence and understand the message, "You're being watched." Before I could even gather the nerve to peek through the blinds, my phone buzzed on the nightstand, startling me so hard I nearly dropped the photo. I grabbed it, hoping it was my wife, hoping it was some chance for answers, but instead it was my younger sister. Her voice trembled through the line, and what she said next pulled the floor out from under me. She told me she had received an envelope in the mail that morning, no return address, just her name scrawled across the front. Inside, she found a single piece of paper with a message written in the same handwriting I had just seen on the back of that photo. My wife's handwriting. The note was short, chillingly simple. "Tell him to stop digging or you'll lose more than he already has." Hearing that, I felt something deeper than fear. I felt rage. It wasn't just me anymore. Whoever was behind this had reached into my family, dragging my sister into a nightmare she had nothing to do with. It was no longer about a marriage gone wrong or a betrayal of trust. This was bigger, wider, and far more dangerous than I had realized. If my wife had vanished with my kidney, she hadn't done it quietly. She had left a trail of intimidation behind her, pulling others into the storm and making it clear that the more I searched for the truth, the more people I loved would become targets. And that's when the stakes shifted entirely, because I couldn't just walk away anymore. Not when my sister was being threatened, not when my life was already shattered. I tried to reassure her, told her I'd figure it out, told her to keep the note safe, but she whispered something that twisted my thoughts in a new direction. She said she recognized the man in the photo I had just discovered, the one with his arm around my wife. She said she had seen him before years ago at our mother's funeral. He had been standing in the back watching, but he never approached us. At the time, she thought maybe he was just an acquaintance, someone paying quiet respects, but now she swore it was the same man. That revelation opened a door to a part of my wife's life I had never been allowed to enter, A past that connected to my family's history in ways that didn't make sense yet. How could someone tied to my wife also be lurking in the background of one of the most painful days of my life? The contradiction gnawed at me. Everything I thought I knew about timelines, about loyalties, about how my life intersected with hers, was starting to unravel. If that man had been there back then, it meant my wife had ties to me long before I believed she did. It meant she had been orbiting my world before we ever met, before she ever claimed to love me. That kind of realization doesn't just shake your marriage, it shakes your entire reality, and I needed to know whether I had ever been in control of my own story or if I had been playing a role in hers from the very beginning. But before I could press my sister for more, before I could piece together how deep these connections ran, a sudden crash came from the front of my house. The sound of glass shattering ripped through the quiet, and my heart leapt into my throat. I rushed toward the living room, every nerve in my body on fire, and found the window smashed, shards glittering across the floor. Lying in the center of the wreckage was a small, plain box. My hands shook as I picked it up, the cardboard damp with evening dew. Inside was something that made my blood run cold. A hospital bracelet with my name on it, the date of my surgery, and a single word scrawled across it in black marker, next. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a kidney. It wasn't about money or desperation or even love twisted into betrayal. This was a game and I was being hunted piece by piece. The enemy, whether it was my wife, the man in the photo, or someone I hadn't even thought of yet, was always one step ahead, pulling strings, removing evidence, and now making sure I knew that every step I took closer to the truth would cost me more than I was ready to lose. And with my sister now entangled in this web, with warnings becoming threats and threats becoming actions, the walls around me felt like they were closing in fast. But as I stared at that hospital bracelet, my sister's voice still faint in my ear, I couldn't help but think of one detail that refused to leave me alone. At the funeral years ago, when she claimed she saw the man with my wife, I remembered something else strange about that day. A bouquet of lilies had been left at the grave with a card tucked inside, unsigned, but written in the same careful handwriting I now knew was hers. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, grief blinding me to the details, but now that memory rose to the surface with razor-sharp clarity. If she had been leaving me breadcrumbs this whole time, then maybe the surgery wasn't the first betrayal. Maybe it had all started long before I even realized I was being played. And just as I let that thought sink in, the lights in my house flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging me into darkness. The house was swallowed in silence the second the power went out, and I don't mean the kind of silence you can relax in, I mean the heavy kind that makes the hair on your arms stand up because suddenly every sound around you feels sharper, amplified, like the world is holding its breath waiting for something to happen. I stood there in the pitch dark with only the shards of broken glass on the floor reflecting faint moonlight, clutching that hospital bracelet in one hand and the photograph in the other, and I realized just how exposed I was. Whoever smashed the window and left that box had done it without fear, without hesitation, like they knew I was too weak and disoriented to fight back. That's when the full weight of it hit me. I wasn't just dealing with betrayal anymore, I wasn't just piecing together the fragments of a broken marriage. I was a target, and someone out there was making it clear that they could get to me anytime they wanted. I tried to steady my breathing, listening for the footsteps I swore I had heard outside before, but the silence was worse than the noise. It meant they could be anywhere, watching from the yard, hiding in the hallway, or already inside with me. My chest tightened as I fumbled for my phone, using the dim glow of the screen to find my way through the living room, when suddenly it buzzed in my hand. A new message popped up from an unknown number and it froze me in place. The words were short, chilling, and unmistakable. "You should have stayed asleep." My stomach dropped. That wasn't just a threat. It was a reminder that whatever happened in that hospital wasn't random, it wasn't an accident, it was part of a plan, and now that I had survived it, someone was making sure I knew survival came with consequences. I thought about calling the police, but then the reality sank in. What would I even tell them? That my wife stole my kidney, vanished, and now strangers were breaking into my house and sending me cryptic threats? To anyone else it would sound insane. And worse, if this ran deeper than just her, if there were people involved who had access to my medical records, my signature, my very body, then how could I trust that the police weren't already compromised? That thought chilled me more than the dark house around me because it meant I was already questioning every safety net I thought I had in place. As I stood there, the silence of the room pressing in, I couldn't stop thinking about my sister. She was alone in her apartment across town, probably staring at that threatening note in fear, and I realized with a crushing weight that she might be the next piece on their board. I wanted to drive straight to her, to grab her and take her somewhere safe, but another thought stopped me cold. What if that was exactly what they wanted? What if pulling me out into the open, forcing me to rush across the city in a panic, was the trap? That's the kind of paranoia that had already started eating away at me, and I could feel it digging in deeper with every second that passed. And then came the sound that made my blood run cold. Not outside, not in the hallway, but upstairs. A slow, deliberate creak of the floorboards, the kind of sound you know in your bones doesn't happen by accident. My wife and I had lived in this house long enough for me to know every groan of the wood, every sigh of the old pipes, and that sound didn't belong. Someone was in my house. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, the blue glow of my phone screen barely lighting the railing, torn between running out the door and climbing those steps to face whatever waited above me. My body ached from the surgery, my stitches still tender, but the fear of doing nothing was worse than the pain. I started up the stairs, every step an act of defiance against the pounding in my chest. Halfway up, another message buzzed on my phone, lighting up the dark with new words from the same number: "You're not supposed to be here." I stared at it, my throat dry, and for the first time in my life I felt completely unmoored, like my very existence had slipped out of my hands and into someone else's control. I had no idea who they were, no idea what here meant. Was it the house, the town, my life itself? But the message was clear enough. I wasn't welcome in my own story anymore. And that's when it happened. At the top of the stairs, in the faint moonlight spilling through the window, I saw it. A shadow moved across the hallway, just a flicker, but enough to make me stop breathing. I raised the phone, trying to light the space, but the screen wasn't strong enough, and all I caught was the outline of someone turning the corner into the master bedroom. My bedroom. The one my wife had emptied of all her things before she vanished. My legs trembled as I forced myself to take another step, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Was it her? Was it the man from the photo? Was it someone else entirely? And why the master bedroom, of all places, the very room where I had spent years believing in love that might never have been real? I reached the top of the stairs, phone trembling in my hand, and the air felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. My heart was racing so fast it hurt, and I could feel the sweat on my palms. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run, to get out while I still could. But another part of me, the part that had already lost too much, knew that running would only delay the inevitable. So I stepped toward that door, every muscle in my body braced for whatever waited inside, and that's when I heard it. A voice, low and calm, drifting from the darkness of the room. A voice I knew, a voice I trusted, a voice that made my blood turn to ice. Was my wife. I froze in the doorway, my breath shallow, my phone casting just enough of a glow to remind me how powerless I was in that moment. The voice had been hers, I knew it as well as I knew my own heartbeat. But it wasn't the soft, reassuring tone I remembered from nights we spent talking ourselves to sleep. It was sharper, weighted with something I couldn't place, almost rehearsed. My chest tightened as I stepped into the room, bracing myself for the impossible, but the bedroom was empty. The curtains stirred in the breeze from the shattered window downstairs, the mattress stripped bare, and the closet doors left wide open as if someone had been searching for something. The echo of her voice still lingered, but she wasn't there. My mind spun as I questioned whether I had finally slipped into some kind of hallucination, but then my phone buzzed again, and when I looked down, my heart nearly stopped. It was a voicemail, time-stamped just seconds before, from my wife's number. With trembling hands, I pressed play, and her voice filled the dark silence around me. She wasn't panicked, she wasn't pleading, she wasn't even apologizing. She sounded calm, composed, almost clinical. "If you're hearing this, it means you didn't follow directions. You were supposed to let it go. You were supposed to trust me. But since you couldn't, everything has to happen sooner than planned." Then there was a pause, long enough to make me wonder if the message had ended, and finally she whispered the words that turned my blood cold: "Check your father's study." The message cut off there, leaving me gripping the phone so tightly I thought I might crack it. My father had died years ago, and his study had been locked ever since, a room I hadn't stepped into in almost a decade. What possible connection could there be between my missing kidney, my wife's betrayal, and a room in my childhood home that had been untouched for years? That voicemail changed everything. Up until that moment, I thought I was chasing her, thought this was about unraveling what she had done and why she had disappeared. But now I realized the center of the mystery wasn't her at all. It was me. My past, my family, and secrets I hadn't even considered were suddenly tangled up in the chaos. Memories of my father came flooding back, his late nights locked in that study, the way he would shut the door whenever I walked past, the quick way he changed the subject whenever I asked what he was working on. I always thought he was just a man weighed down by work, but now I couldn't shake the possibility that he had been guarding something darker, something my wife had discovered and used as leverage. The longer I stood there, the more I realized how blind I had been. My marriage hadn't just been a love story gone wrong, it had been built on layers of secrets, and the person I trusted most had been walking me straight into them. Was my kidney just collateral damage in a much larger plan? Was I nothing more than a link in a chain that began long before I was old enough to recognize it? And most terrifying of all, how much of what I believed about my own life had been a carefully crafted lie. Before I could process it, my sister called again, her voice frantic. She said she had gone to Mom's house looking for answers after the strange envelope, and when she broke into Dad's locked study, she found something I never expected to hear. Stacks of old files, photographs, even medical records. Ours. What? Documents that detailed not just my health but procedures and experiments I had no memory of undergoing as a child. She swore one folder even listed my blood type and organ compatibility next to a series of names we didn't recognize, like some kind of ledger. And among those names, written in handwriting that made my skin crawl, was the name of the man from the photo with my wife. That revelation tore apart everything I thought I knew. This wasn't just about betrayal between husband and wife, this wasn't about love gone wrong, it was about something planned, something generational, something that had been set in motion before I was even old enough to understand it. My wife hadn't just stolen from me, she had inherited something, picked up a thread that my father had been weaving years before. And now, staring at that voicemail, listening to her calm instructions to dig into my own family's secrets, I realized the unthinkable. She hadn't been running from me, she had been guiding me step by step, into uncovering a truth I might not survive knowing. The weight of it crushed me. If my father had been involved in whatever this was, then every memory of my childhood was stained with lies. The surgeries he told me were routine, the locked doors, the hushed conversations behind closed doors with strangers who never stayed long, all of it began to take on new, sinister meaning. My wife wasn't just a partner turned betrayer, she was part of a story that had started long before. I met her, and for reasons I still couldn't piece together, I was at the center of it. And just as that realization sank in, another message came through, this one from an unknown number. It was a single image, a photo of my sister standing in the doorway of our father's study, fear written across her face. Beneath it was a line of text that made the walls close in around me. She knows too much. The photo of my sister standing in the study wouldn't leave my mind, even as I sat in the dark house with the phone still buzzing in my hand. That one line beneath her picture, she knows too much, wasn't just a warning, it was a threat, and the more I stared at it, the more I understood that whoever was behind this wasn't bluffing. They were telling me outright that her life was now tethered to my decisions, and if I made the wrong move she would pay the price. My stomach churned with guilt because I had dragged her into this, not by choice but by blood, by the twisted threads of family secrets neither of us had asked for. And now, sitting there with that image seared into my brain, I realized I was being forced into a corner where every option felt like a trap. The phone rang again, this time with a live call from that same unknown number, and against my better judgment I answered it. A man's voice came through, low and steady, with the kind of authority that didn't need to raise itself to be terrifying. He didn't waste time with threats or explanations. He simply said, "We want the files your father kept. All of them. You bring them to us and your sister lives. Refuse and you'll lose her the way you already lost your kidney." My throat tightened as I listened, my mind spinning. The files weren't even in my hands. They were in hers, across town, in a study I hadn't entered since I was a teenager. I didn't know who this man was or how he was connected to my wife, but I could hear in his voice that he wasn't bluffing. He was offering me a choice, family or truth. And in that moment, I hated myself because I didn't know which one I valued more. The weight of it pressed down on me because for the first time, it wasn't about survival, it was about what I was willing to sacrifice. If I handed over the files, I could save my sister, but in doing so I would bury the truth forever, letting them walk away with the very secrets that had cost me so much already. If I refused, if I dug deeper, I might uncover the answers I desperately needed about my wife, my father, and myself, but the cost could be her life. How do you make that choice? How do you decide which pain you can live with? The pain of never knowing or the pain of losing someone you love because you refuse to give in? I sat there with the line still open, the man silent on the other end as if he knew I was wrestling with it, and I thought back to all the nights my wife and I used to lie awake, whispering dreams for the future. I had trusted her then, believed in her, loved her with everything I had, and now she was the reason I was missing an organ, the reason my sister was in danger, the reason my entire life felt like a lie. Yet even with all of that, there was a part of me that still wanted to hear her explain herself, still wanted to believe that some piece of her had loved me, had meant what she said on those nights when we planned our lives together. That part of me whispered that maybe handing over the files would give me another chance to see her, to demand answers face to face. But the other part, the louder part, knew better. That part of me remembered the photo of her with the stranger, the voicemail that led me to my father's study, the threats that kept circling closer like vultures. That part of me knew she wasn't guiding me to safety. She was guiding me exactly where she wanted me, one careful step at a time. And if I gave in now, if I handed over those files, it wouldn't just be my sister's life that was on the line. It would be everything, every shred of truth, every chance to finally understand what had been done to me. When the man finally broke the silence, his voice cut through like a blade. You have 24 hours. Bring the files to the address we'll send, or you'll get another box. But this time it won't be empty. Then the line went dead, leaving me shaking, the air in the room so heavy it felt like it was pressing me into the floor. 24 hours. That was the ultimatum. And I couldn't ignore the truth of it. I didn't just have to decide between safety and truth. I had to decide between being a brother who would do anything to protect his family or being a man who was finally brave enough to face the past that had been haunting him his whole life. The worst part was knowing I couldn't trust anyone. Not my wife, not the strangers pulling the strings, not even my father's memory. And yet, the thought that gutted me most was this. What if the person I couldn't trust was myself? What if every choice I had made up to this point, every decision to dig deeper, had already doomed the people I loved? I sat there, torn between love and truth, family and answers, and realized something horrifying. This wasn't just about me making an impossible choice. This was about them watching to see which way I broke, because whichever option I picked would tell them everything they needed to know about the kind of man I really was. And that realization nearly destroyed me. The 24 hours they gave me bled into a blur of panic and adrenaline, my mind replaying the ultimatum over and over as if the words had been carved into me. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and every sound outside the house sent me lunging for the blinds, convinced another warning was about to be hurled through the window. But the silence was worse than the noise because it meant they were watching without showing themselves, letting me twist in my own fear until I broke. And while I wrestled with the choice of saving my sister or unearthing the truth, a much darker reality began to unfold, one I hadn't been ready to face. The conspiracy wasn't just about me or my missing kidney or even my wife's betrayal. It was so much larger, so much more entrenched, and by the time I realized it, I was already tangled too deep to claw my way out. It started when I finally drove to my mother's house, where my sister had been hiding after finding those files in the study. I expected her to meet me at the door, anxious, relieved to see me, but the house was quiet when I arrived, eerily so. The lights were on, the front door unlocked, but no one answered when I called her name. My stomach sank as I moved through the house, the same house I had grown up in, each room holding the weight of old memories. When I reached the study, the air felt heavier, and for the first time I noticed just how meticulously the room had been locked away. Dust lined the shelves, papers stacked in boxes that looked untouched for years, yet something was wrong. There were gaps where folders had been pulled, trails in the dust where someone had rifled through in a hurry. My sister hadn't just found something in here, she had taken it. And now she was gone. I thought maybe she had left in a rush, maybe she had gone to hide somewhere safer. But then I found her phone lying face down on the desk, screen cracked as if it had been dropped mid-struggle. That image will never leave me because it meant she hadn't walked away willingly. They had taken her, and the realization that I had wasted precious hours agonizing over my choice hit me like a fist to the chest. My sister was gone, and it was because I had hesitated. I should have called the police, but the second I turned on her phone, I understood why that wasn't an option. There were messages stored inside, dozens of them, from numbers I didn't recognize, all detailing meetings, names, coded instructions, and they weren't just sent to her. They were sent to my wife, to my father, even to people I knew from the neighborhood growing up. It was like uncovering a hidden web, one that had been strung through my life long before I had ever realized I was caught in it. And at the center of it, one name repeated itself over and over, Dr. Alan Mercer. A name that made my blood run cold because he hadn't been a stranger. He had been my father's closest friend, a man who had sat at our dinner table, toasted birthdays, even spoken at his funeral. Someone I trusted, someone I had looked up to as a second father, was in on this. The truth landed hard. My father hadn't been working alone. He had been part of something organized, something much bigger, and my wife hadn't just stumbled into it. She had been chosen. Every moment of our relationship, every piece of my life that I thought was mine, had been orchestrated by people who had been circling me for decades. The files weren't just medical records. They were ledgers, evidence of procedures and organ extractions tied to dozens of names. And if Dr. Mercer was connected, That meant this wasn't just some underground operation. This was systemic, planned, and protected by people who had power far beyond what I could fight. I left the study shaking, desperate for air, when headlights washed over the driveway and a familiar car pulled up. For a moment my heart leapt. I thought maybe my sister had escaped and returned, but when the door opened my world tilted again. It was my mother. I hadn't seen her in weeks, not since the funeral she could barely stand through, and I thought she'd been too consumed by grief to leave her bed. But she walked up the steps steady, her face cold, and when she saw me she didn't look surprised. She looked disappointed. "You weren't supposed to come here," she said softly, like a teacher scolding a child. And then, before I could respond, she added words that shattered me more than anything else had. "Your father wanted to protect you from this. But you had to keep digging." My mother knew. She had known all along. The woman who raised me, who held me through nightmares as a child, who I thought was the last safe place I could turn to, she wasn't a victim of the conspiracy. She was part of it. That betrayal cut deeper than the surgery, deeper than the threats, deeper than anything I had uncovered so far, because it meant there was no one left I could trust. My wife, my father, my mother, they had all been complicit in weaving this web around me. I stood there speechless as she set her keys on the table, her eyes fixed on me with a mixture of pity and frustration. "They'll come for you tonight," she said quietly, "and you'll have to decide whether you want to survive or whether you want to know the truth. But you can't have both." And with that, she walked past me, disappearing into the dark halls of the house as if she lived there still, leaving me to wrestle with the crushing realization that the walls I thought protected me were built to contain me. And that was when my phone lit up with a new message, this one not from an unknown number but from my wife herself. Just 2 words, but they split me in half. "It's time." The drive to the address they finally sent me was the longest of my life, every mile heavy with the weight of what I was about to walk into. It wasn't some abandoned warehouse on the edge of town or a back-alley meeting spot like in movies. It was a private medical facility I vaguely remembered from childhood, the kind of place where my father had once taken me for routine checkups, that had never felt routine. Pulling up, I could feel my chest tightening, because even from the outside the building radiated the cold sterility of secrets too big to stay hidden forever. My stomach twisted as I stepped through the glass doors and the faint hum of fluorescent lights swallowed me whole. The air smelled of disinfectant and metal, sharp and suffocating, and I knew before I even reached the end of the hall that this place was the heart of it all. They were waiting for me in what looked like an operating theater, the kind of room where lives were saved or stolen depending on who held the scalpel. My wife stood at the center, calm, her hair tied back like she was about to scrub in, her expression unreadable. Beside her was Dr. Mercer, older now, but his eyes still sharp with the same measured confidence I remembered from childhood dinners. And behind them, restrained in a chair, was my sister, her eyes wide with terror, a strip of tape pressed across her mouth. I froze at the sight of her, every muscle in my body screaming to lunge forward, but Mercer raised a hand with the same casual authority he had always carried, and it was enough to stop me cold. "This was never supposed to be your burden," Mercer said, his voice steady and almost fatherly, as if this was a lecture rather than a confrontation. "Your father tried to protect you from it, but you couldn't leave it alone. You kept pulling at the thread and now everything unravels." I wanted to scream at him, demand answers, but my wife stepped forward first, her voice low and steady. "You think I betrayed you, but you don't understand. You were never supposed to be just my husband. You were the link, the key. Every part of your life has been leading to this moment, and whether you accept it or not, your body has always belonged to something larger than you." Her words cut deeper than a blade. It wasn't about love, it wasn't about us, it wasn't even about the missing kidney, it was about control. My entire life, from childhood surgeries to the marriage I thought I had chosen, had been orchestrated as part of some generational pact, some network of men like Mercer and women like her who operated in shadows, trading lives and organs like currency. My father had been part of it, my mother had enabled it, and my wife had carried it forward, each of them weaving me into their design without ever giving me a choice. I could feel my rage boiling, my body trembling as I finally shouted, "Why me? Why take everything from me?" For the first time, her composure faltered, and her eyes softened just enough to reveal a crack in her armor. "Because you were never meant to survive him," she said, nodding toward Mercer. "Your father made a deal, one that required a sacrifice. You lived because someone else didn't. That's why he kept you close, why he locked those files away. The truth isn't that we betrayed you. The truth is that you've been living on borrowed time since the day you were born." The weight of it nearly crushed me. My life wasn't stolen, it had been bought. Every decision, every memory, Every heartbeat I thought was mine had been a debt owed to people who had never seen me as more than a resource. And now, standing in that sterile room watching my sister struggle against her restraints, I realized I had only one chance to end it, one chance to make a choice that was truly mine. Mercer moved closer, holding out the files I had brought from the study, his eyes narrowing. "Hand them over and she lives," he said. "Resist and you'll lose her. Just like you'll lose everything else." The moment stretched like glass ready to shatter, and then something inside me broke. Instead of handing the files to Mercer, I threw them down onto the surgical table, scattering the papers across the sterile steel. My wife lunged forward, furious, but in that split second I caught sight of something on one of the pages. A photograph I hadn't noticed before, faded and yellowed with time. It wasn't me. It wasn't my sister. It was another child, a boy who looked eerily like me, standing beside my father in the very same study where the files had been kept. My stomach dropped as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I hadn't been the only one. There had been another before me, a brother I had never been told about, a child who had vanished from history as if he never existed. And as my wife snatched the photo from the table, her face twisted with panic, I understood why. He had been the first sacrifice. The first life traded away to keep the network alive. I wasn't just a pawn, I was the replacement. The echo of a child erased so thoroughly that even my mother had buried him in silence. That was the truth they had fought to keep hidden, the reason I had been protected and groomed and watched my whole life. The room erupted in chaos. Mercer shouting orders, my wife gripping the photo as if it were the only thing that mattered, my sister sobbing behind the tape, and I realized I had one final choice. I could walk away, let them keep their secrets, or I could burn it all down, even if it meant destroying myself in the process. My hands shook as I grabbed a scalpel from the tray, my reflection staring back at me from its silver edge. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about survival. I was thinking about freedom, about ending the cycle that had started long before I was born. I turned toward Mercer, my voice low but steady, and said the words that felt like tearing chains off my own soul. "This ends with me." But before I could move, before I could take that step, the lights above flickered violently and then died, plunging the room into black. I heard a scream, my sister's muffled cry, and the sound of footsteps scrambling. When the backup generator hummed to life and the lights flickered back on, the chair was empty. My sister was gone. And in her place, taped to the armrest, was another note written in my wife's unmistakable handwriting. For words that left me shaking, my vision blurring with fury and fear all at once. "Your turn is next." When the lights came back on and I saw that empty chair, my body went cold with a fear I can't describe, because in that instant I realized I hadn't just lost my sister to the same shadowy network that had haunted my life, I had been forced into the very role they had been shaping me for all along. 4 days afterward, I moved through the world like a ghost, carrying the note my wife had left for me, those 4 words, "Your turn is next," burned into my brain. And yet, somewhere beneath the anger and grief, something inside me shifted. For the first time in my life, I saw the truth with painful clarity. Everything they had built, everything my father, my wife, Dr. Mercer, and the others had sacrificed to maintain, was held together by silence and secrecy. And silence is only as strong as the people who keep it. I understood then that if I wanted this cycle to end, if I wanted to free not just myself but every nameless person caught in their web, I couldn't fight them in the shadows. I had to bring the shadows into the light. It wasn't easy. It took weeks of piecing together what I could from the files that hadn't been stolen, following trails of old contacts who thought their involvement had been forgotten, and confronting the memories I had tried to bury. Every time I hit a wall, I heard my father's voice in my head, the way he used to tell me as a child that some doors were better left closed, and I felt the urge to turn back. But I also thought of that faded photograph of the boy who looked like me, the brother I never knew, erased so thoroughly he had become nothing more than a ghost in the margins of a file. I thought of my sister's terrified eyes as she sat bound in that chair, and of the child I once was, walking blindly into hospitals under the guise of routine checkups while the adults whispered around me. That's what kept me moving forward, the knowledge that if I stayed quiet I would be no better than them. Eventually the story broke. Not because I handed it to the police who I knew could be compromised, but because I pushed it into the one place they couldn't control, the public. Documents leaked, photographs surfaced, names were exposed. At first, people didn't believe it. Who would want to believe that families could trade in their own children, that networks of respected doctors and community leaders could build empires from stolen blood and organs? But then survivors began to speak, other voices began to rise, and suddenly the silence cracked wide open. And though I knew it wouldn't bring my sister back immediately, I felt something stir in me for the first time in years: hope. But even in the wake of exposure, there were questions I couldn't answer. My wife had disappeared again, vanishing into the same shadows she came from, and Mercer's name never made it into the files I leaked. That told me one of two things: either someone higher than him had protected him, or he had been clever enough to bury himself deeper than I imagined. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I wondered if I had really won anything at all, or if I had only been allowed to tear down one layer of a much larger web. And the note she left me still haunts me because it wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. Your turn is next. I don't know if she meant my life, my freedom, or something darker, but the words linger like a shadow I can't shake. I would like to tell you that I found peace, that after everything I endured I walked away free. But the truth is more complicated. Peace doesn't come when the monsters are gone, it comes when you learn to live knowing they may still be out there. Some nights, I wake from dreams of my sister's voice calling my name, and I swear I hear footsteps outside my door, just faint enough to make me wonder if someone is still watching. And yet, every morning I get up and breathe, every day I speak the truth they tried to silence, I take back a little piece of what they stole from me. So here's what I've learned. Sometimes survival isn't about winning the battle, it's about refusing to let them write the ending for you. My wife, my parents, Mercer, they all tried to shape me into something I never agreed to be. But the story you've heard, the story I'm still telling, belongs to me now. And if there's one thing I want you to take from it, it's this: secrets only survive in silence, but the moment you speak them aloud, you take away their power. Still, I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. Because late last night, as I sat by the window staring into the dark, my phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. No threats this time, no riddles, just a photograph. My sister. Alive. Standing in a place I didn't recognize. And beneath it, for new words that made my heart stop the way they had in that operating room. She's waiting for you. And just like that, I knew the story wasn't finished.